This is the Allison in Wonderland Mental Health Podcast with your host, Allison Frye.
This is the place that looks through the looking glass and falls down the rabbit hole while discussing mental health.
Join this journey that isn't just about putting mental health into a box that is only about anxiety, depression, or other common topics.
Allison in Wonderland is about everything that is in that box, as well as all of the things that don't quite fit into a box.
Here is your host, mental health advocate, Allison Frye.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Allison in Wonderland Mental Health Podcast. We have a special guest today, but I'm going to let her introduce herself in just a moment. I wanted to remind everyone that I am not a doctor. I am a mental health advocate. If you are in a state of crisis, please call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. The Suicide Lifeline has recently updated their number to 988, and that is a 3-digit number that you can text or call anywhere in the country, and they will help you get crisis support immediately in your area. Once again, that is 988. And now I'd like to welcome Dr. Melissa Green and let her introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Melissa Green. I'm a psychologist. I'm licensed to practice in Georgia and Hawaii. I focus in a lot of different areas, and I started out as a school psychologist working with children and adolescents, and then I moved to military, which is very different. When I moved to Hawaii and I worked on a military installation, doing a lot of combat trauma therapy. And from there, I went into forensics. And now I have shifted my focus to working more in preventive, early intervention, wellness. So I'm focusing on brain health and healthy aging and giving support to dementia caregivers.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know we had touched on this before, but when you were explaining it, it's almost like you've started through the life cycle. Like you started with people in school and then into the military and into forensics and then into the elder care and the dementia. It's like you're kind of gradually moving through the life cycle that people go through with their mental health. It's really an interesting progression of your career and your specialties.
You're absolutely right. I hadn't thought of it that way. I think part of it is because I'm aging as well. So my interest is shifting to some of those other areas that maybe, I hadn't thought about when I was starting my practice as a psychologist.
Yeah, I absolutely get that. I'm going through my empty nest phase. And so I've been focusing on how to, empty nest in a healthy way. And obviously 15 years ago when I started studying psychology, I didn't care anything about empty nesting. So I can definitely see how that would be a thing. So we want to focus on and brain health, healthy aging, and dementia caregiver support. And those all seem really very interesting. So do you want to just start and tell us a little bit about what you mean by brain health?
Yeah, so there are certain things that we can do to help to improve certain areas of our cognitive ability or maintain certain areas of cognitive ability throughout the life cycle. There are certain areas that will obviously start to degrade a little bit, but there are things that we can do to help to be able to have a full and enjoyable life where we can be as independent as possible. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on, teaching people about those things that they can do, which include, movement or exercise, eating certain diets, and really not so much of the diet, but just making sure to incorporate certain types of foods, those kinds of things.
That makes sense. So what about, wow, words. What age do you say people would need to really start kind of focusing on their brain health, or is it just as soon as you become an adult, you're in it?
So honestly, people have told me throughout my life, I'm 51, and throughout my life, people have told me that I look a lot younger. So it's something that was not really in my awareness until I would say like the last 10 years. But if I had to go back and tell my younger self when I should start really focusing on these things, I would say really as soon as you're maybe not even an adult, as soon as you're aware enough to know that these choices are healthier versus these choices are not healthier, then you're already combating the aging process as soon as you can start to become aware of it. And I think people think of uh, brain health and healthy aging practices as being restrictive sometimes. So they think, oh, those are things that I do later on in life. But the earlier you start to incorporate those things into your life, the healthier you'll be. And also there's a link to emotional wellness. So the happier you will be as well.
Yeah, it's almost like when you're 20, you don't really think about your retirement fund and your 401k, but you should be thinking about it then. So it seems very similar to that. Like
Right.
you reach the point where you're like, "Oh my goodness, I need to start paying attention to retirement."
Absolutely.
It it
Yes.
it is funny for anyone that watches this video. They're going to think that I specifically picked out guests based on how young they look because everyone on the show has looked 10 to 20 years younger than they actually are. And that's my thing as well. I'm like, "Hey, yeah, my youngest child is 19." And they're like, "What?" And it's really funny. But yeah, I mean, like it's interesting because I think people kind of talk to you and expect a little bit different from you than what you give because you have more life experience than what people think that you have based on just like the cover of the book. So I think that it's also an interesting thing there where it's like, hey, why are you even thinking about these things? And it's like, well, because I'm 40 and my back hurts when I pull the laundry out of the dryer.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And another thing that really influenced my shift and the fact that I'm working with caregivers is the fact that my father has two types of dementia. So back in 2014, I was living a wonderful life, living in Hawaii, um, working on a military installation, had a lot of friends and great times. And then my dad started to have problems remembering things. And I would say, hey, next time you go to the doctor, tell him to check your memory. And then, of course, for a person that's having memory problems, that's not a thing to tell them. So I said, did you tell him? Oh, I forgot. And so after a couple of times, he remembered, and uh, they did some testing. They sent him to a neurologist and then to a neuropsychologist. And he was diagnosed with vascular dementia and also Alzheimer's type. So two types of neurocognitive disorders. And so since then, I've really been interested in how I can learn more about what I can do to help myself as far as I age, as far as aging, and to help other people, and also how I can help the people who are caring for their loved ones who are aging and give them some hope that they can still have some positive experiences with their loved ones, even if they're going through that process, because it's really a very, very challenging situation for most people.
Yeah, absolutely. I recently was kind of scrolling through my Instagram feed and had seen information about this. I think Instagram really has me pegged because it's constantly popping up suggested things about mental health and about cats. Those are the two things it shows me. I think healthy aging is really important. The caregiver support can obviously be at any stage of the person's life. When you're caring, you can have an adult child, you can have a sibling, you can also then end up being the caregiver for the older generation in your family, which I think is the most common when it comes, but it can be very draining. I know my mother was a hospice nurse, and I have no idea how she had so much patience, like with all of it. And then when I was getting my master's degree, I had to do some interning at a memory care unit, and it was very interesting, really seeing everything that was in place. And it was actually a very nice facility. And I told my husband, I was like, hey, if I ever, need memory care support, go put me in that place, because it's nice and then you don't have to do it. But I think that's because I experienced a very nice facility, and that's not always the case. But it definitely put it very, top of mind at the time. And so I guess then really, so you go from, this is your brain health, and you want to make sure your brain is healthy, and this is a lifelong journey. So how do you, like, what steps should you take for healthy aging or healthy brain aging?
So one of the first things that I would suggest people do is to start to evaluate their own beliefs about aging, because there is research out there now that suggests that what you think about how you age actually impacts the way that you age. It has an impact on the aging process. So if you think negatively about aging, if you like, oh my gosh, I'm 51, and now now that means I have to, join AARP, which I did last year. I have to do all these, I have to be concerned about, all these health issues and this and that. If there's a sense of dread, then that actually will have a negative impact on the way that your body ages. So just thinking about it in conversations with people, and I'm starting to do this a lot more, when you say something, even if it's, as a joke about aging, how that can impact you. And also all the things that we're bombarded with, like in the media and people that we see, and everything is anti-aging. And I think we need to be aware of what we're consuming and how it's impacting us, and change those beliefs and change the conversations that we have about aging, and not be ashamed. That's why I've always proudly said my age, but now I have more motivation to do that, right? Because I know that it can impact me in a positive way. So I think people examining their age beliefs, they can do that by keeping an age belief journal for a couple of weeks, just writing down things that they say or that they think, or that they hear other people saying or thinking, and then challenging those beliefs in some way. How could it be shifted in a way where it's more positive?
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember, and this has only been recent, like I've never really cared about getting older, but people have always thought I was significantly younger. So I don't know if that's part of it. But the first time I ever really started posting things about, oh my God, I'm 40, it was because of all of the things where it was like, you're 40 and now this, like you're 40, now go get a mammogram, and you're 40, now go do this. And I think that there are different stages in your life where it's like, yay, you're 18, you're an adult. Yay, you're 21, you can legally drink and things like that. 24, you can rent a car. But then when you hit, a certain age, like you hit, where, especially for women, where you have to start paying more attention to breast health. You have to start paying more attention to the fact that menopause is going to hit and all of these things. Then you start becoming very ingrained with you're like, oh, aging is negative because I'm at risk for all of these other things to happen now. And so it was only within the last year that I even seemed to care about getting older. And it wasn't so much that, it was just that, I turned 40, and every doctor I'd ever seen in the world sent me an email blast saying, hey, it's time to get your mammogram. So like, you're 40, do this. And I feel like, I do feel like I probably was posting some things that weren't super happy about aging, even though I'm not normally concerned about that. But I see what you're saying, because I was getting all of this information from around me, and it was kind of draining me and stressing me out. And I can definitely see where if you're kind of in a friend group and you're all talking about things like that, and you're at your Botox party, so you don't have, smile lines anymore and things, how that could definitely cause issues. So the first step to healthy aging is to evaluate your beliefs on what aging means. So that and be really
Yes.
aware. Okay, so
Right. And you can't change anything unless you're aware of it. It's basically what I would do with someone in therapy, we would try to identify what type of limiting beliefs they may have or just unhelpful thoughts and then challenge those or say what's the evidence that I have to support this. And I even do it now with friends because sometimes we may attribute things to aging that we didn't attribute to aging before when it's not really an aging issue. It could be, something else. It could just be, I have a sore muscle or something like that because I did exercise and I would have had that 10 years ago. So yeah, I think challenging those people around you too. And when I say challenge, I don't mean it in a confrontational way necessarily, but just raising a different opinion about what could be the source of the problem or what could be, the issue.
well, and it's also it seems like if you present it in the right way, it's more of an encouraging thing than a challenging thing. It's like, hey, this isn't you and how you are the rest of your life because of your age. Maybe it's this other thing that can be addressed. And you know what I mean? So it seems like if you help shift that belief and you do it in a sensitive way, and I think most people know their friends' personalities well enough to know how to who you can just be like, girl, that is not your age. That is because you drink too much. And who
Right. Yeah.
and who you have to kind of delicately be like, well, I thought I was having that problem, but really it ended up being this thing. So, I think people generally know their friends, to where they know how to navigate those conversations, but it seems like it could really turn it into a positive where you're like, hey, this isn't because you're 51. This is this other thing. And hey, that there's a fix for that. It's, try to eat
Right.
more, get more folic acid or something like that. I'm just thinking of a random, vitamin in your diet.
Right. And I think it also goes along with a lot of myths that we have about aging that it feeds into negative beliefs. Like, there are myths that we shouldn't exercise or do certain exercises as we get older, but the reality is that we really need to move as much as possible when we get older. You may not be, necessarily running a marathon, but it's important to stay active, and it doesn't have to be these long or strenuous workouts, but frequent movement is helpful.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm one of those that, yesterday Googled workouts to do for people that hate working. It is actually what I typed into
That's
the
me.
bar.
That sounds like me. Yeah.
It's funny because it always in my life has felt like a punishment to have to work out. It's like you're being punished, but really it's just about putting something into a healthy daily habit. And I think that when you're talking about the myths, I've recently been, talking to there was another guest that we talked about, the myths and the metaphors of, eating and our relationships with food and, women in like in general. And, there used to be like this very innate, when you look at stories that have been passed down generations of women being, like the goddess of the tribe, really, because women really are the ones that can bring so much to the world. We bring life, all of these things. But then also when you put that same thought into, the elders in your community, they've got the wisdom and everything, where a lot of times it's like, no, we need to constantly turn back the clocks and do whatever we can to feel feel younger and feel like we did when we were 20, but guess what? We're not 20 anymore. So also kind of taking that and not feeling like, oh, I'm getting older and that's a negative. Really embrace that life experience that can help you, be that wisdom person in the life that used to we would hear as being like the good person in the community, and not the person that's kind of being shunned away because they are no longer working or putting things into society because they have other things to contribute that are not, hey, I'm going to go work a 9 to 5 and things like that. And I think that that's really important, where we become very tied to our careers as our identities and things like that. And that can be a
Yes.
struggle as you age. Like, okay, well, now what is my career? I struggle with that. I'm in digital marketing, and I'm the only person with grown children. Like, I'm working with some people that are the age of my oldest child. So it's very
Mm.
interesting because it's the identity at work has changed very much as I've gotten older, and I really can't picture the easy transition to not working anymore because I've worked my whole life. So I imagine that's kind of part of shifting your brain on the aging process too, is what your life looks like as you get older.
Right. You're absolutely right that we have a lot of our identity is wrapped up in our careers and jobs. And when we spend so much time, or a lot of us, focus on when we can retire, but then when we stop working, we feel like we don't have that sense of purpose. And that can lead to depression and isolation and all of that. So it's actually there. The Global Council on Brain Health actually has done some research about multi-generational relationships. So even though it may seem a little awkward to be in a workplace with someone that's like your child's age, there does seem to be some benefit on both ends for the younger person and the older person, to have those relationships and to be able to teach those things that maybe they can't learn in a book. Teach them the wisdom of life, right, that you've learned from your experiences. And also we can learn from the younger generations as well. So it's important to keep that in mind, to try to find ways to continue to interact with people from different generations, whether it's family members, or some people may, like if you don't have children, like I don't have any children, but I have a lot of nieces and nephews. So having them in my life, or volunteering, being involved with organizations where you can engage with other people who maybe are younger or older.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I feel like some of the best friendships that I've had, not necessarily as far as age goes, have been with people that were just polar opposites from me in some areas. Completely different political beliefs, completely different religion, things like that. But coming into those things where we could have calm, rational discussions about where we each were coming from on those things, kind of shifted both of us a little bit, because it's like things aren't so drastic to each side when you talk to someone that you love and you care about that has a different perspective from you. You can both learn and grow. And I can see how that would be the same with people, that are different ages. So, there are things that I don't understand. Like, I really have a hard time with the social media trend where I'm like, can I just post pictures of my cats and that's all I do? When really it's like this whole active thing and it seems exhausting to me. And then I can get tips from, people that are younger, and it immediately makes it easier because I would have never thought about it that way. In my mind, social media is just this, time drain that I have to do because it's part of marketing online. And then I also can think about, when you're talking to people that are, younger than you at work, there's someone getting married and she made a comment about how she doesn't have babies yet. So randomly something will come up in life and I'll send her a Slack message and be like, parenting tip number 1, don't teach your kids to be sarcastic. It's cute when they're 4. You want to murder them if they do it when they're 16. So it kind of ends up being this interesting balance that you get. And then there's also the stories that, the elders in your family will have. No one's written them down. And it's really nice to have that knowledge kind of passed from person to person.
That's true. And I think that unfortunately is valued more in a lot of other countries outside of the US. That's another reason why I really want to educate people more about the benefits of making sure that they keep the elders actively involved in the things that are going on in the family and in the community.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it seems like that benefits you, but it also will benefit their healthy aging because they're staying involved. Are there any other aspects now? I know that I've been targeted by quite a few little games that are like, play this brain teaser app on your phone and it will keep you from, getting dementia or memory loss. Do you find that those things are all just kind of gimmicky, or is it good to sit and play puzzles and things like that for your brain?
So it is good to be cognitively stimulated, but I do think from things that I've read that some companies may overpromise what the result is going to be, if that's a word. But it's definitely a good thing to keep your mind actively engaged, whether you're doing puzzles or being socially engaging with other people. Surprisingly enough, that is one thing that really has a positive impact on aging in general, and really on our emotional well-being as well. I always say I'm an extra introvert, but the reality is that none of us can function in life in a vacuum, right? We all need people, and the research shows that those people who are involved in social activities, maybe they're involved in religious groups, going to church, or they're volunteering with certain organizations or professional organizations, or volunteering at schools. Those people are the ones who are happier and they are healthier. So having that human connection and interaction with people. So you may be doing games in a group setting. Yeah, that's a double benefit, right? So
That makes sense. I know that 2 years ago, I started working with my therapist on preparing for my empty nest. And it was so funny because people would be like, no one prepares this much for their empty nest. But I'd spent my entire adult life as a mom and was a little worried what would happen. So I'm curious if there are, ways to prepare for that retirement phase to make sure that, okay, I'm going to retire in 2 years. Like my dad's in that spot right now. He's I think able to retire in a year and a half. And so like during that year and a half, are there things that that person should be doing to make sure that that transition is not, it doesn't go from, yay, I get to retire to, oh my gosh, I feel useless all of a sudden, how do people prepare for those things?
that's a good question. I don't know that people actually do that. I think people prepare financially, but that's a good point, and something that maybe we should start shifting our focus to, because I've seen with a lot of military service members that I worked with as they were transitioning out, or the veterans. So I work with active duty, but I also work with veterans now. I do evaluations, and they're not even that old. They're like in their 30s, right? And they have that same feeling because they had done something for so long and they had not prepared to transition into a totally different community, So I think it's very important to, make sure that you have your social support network, whether it's family, friends, some group that you're a part of, or, at least a handful of people that you know that you can talk to as you make that transition. And it would be even more beneficial if it were people who were maybe going through the same thing or had recently gone through the same thing that can help you to be able to figure out what you can do once you leave your job. I think a lot of people, going back to the myths, think that if they're not working in their jobs, then they're not able to contribute in any way because they think maybe they can't learn or they can't learn as well as they could before. And it may take a little bit more effort, but as you get older, you definitely are still able to learn new things, taking classes. I think traveling. Some people are part of travel groups. I love to travel, so I would love to do that when after I retire. Just take trips, things like that, because that also helps to build neuronal connections when you're traveling and learning about different people and different cultures, which again is good for brain health and aging in general.
I mean, that makes perfect sense. I think also the travel group thing is an interesting idea because you may be part of a couple where one of the spouses is not, they don't travel the same way. Like they don't want to go see all the sites and they want to just be chill. And if you're in a whole group, then people can kind of shift based on the way they like to travel. I like everything to be like scheduled. and
Oh my
then
goodness.
and then
Me
my husband's like, can't we just go on vacation and not have a schedule?
too. We are so similar. When I lived in Hawaii, one of my friends came. She's like, "Oh my goodness, we have like an agenda for every day." And then my cousin came to visit, and she was like, "Hey, I just want to rest." And then another cousin came, and I was like, "Okay, I guess everybody doesn't," because I wanted to make sure that they saw all these, different
See all
sites
the
and what.
things, yeah.
Yes, and check these off. And they were not really that interested. They're like, okay, maybe one day, but so I had to learn how to balance that. Basically, what I'm saying is that I realize that everybody does not have an agenda when they go on vacation. Some people want to go on vacation to rest. So I'm getting there. Yeah.
It's hard. It really is. The one time we were spontaneous a few years ago and went to the beach for the 4th of July, I added up the budget or what we had spent afterwards, and I showed my husband like what we had spent on previous vacations where I had planned everything, and it was like 5 times more money that we spent when we didn't plan the things because
Oh,
I mean, because it was not planned. He's like,
wow.
"Okay, you can make a plan next time."
That's interesting. Yeah.
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 So, I know that dementia caregiver support in general is difficult. It's I think that you know, I just remember in school there being so much about how draining it is to be a caregiver, especially when it's someone that you're related to, where if it's an outside, clinician coming in and helping, that it's different because it's not, you don't also have all the emotional baggage of the relationship with that person from years, time. So, I was recently in a caregiver situation. It was not for dementia. It was ironically, from the conversation we just had, someone that had processed out of the military without knowing that that was what was going to happen. So, there was a lot
Mm,
of watch and transition and things like that. And at one point, I sent my therapist an email, and I was just so exhausted, and I was like, what do I do to self-care during this? I was like, because I was like, I'm just wiped out. And usually my mental health is just so important to me that I make it primary, and it couldn't be primary at that time. And so I think that caregiver support makes perfect sense. And then, years ago, my grandmother, who I think lived to be 97 and had I think 99 direct descendants when she passed away. She had the
Wow.
last couple of years, she had dementia, and I went and hung out there during the day because the family would have shifts to keep her in the house so she wouldn't have to go into a nursing home. And so my dad would spend his off days there, so he'd be exhausted. And I would come and hang out and bring lunch and let him go outside and rest or do a load of laundry. And we would end up in these conversations, my grandmother and I, that they were loops, and it was her looking at the photo album, and it was really heartbreaking for me because she kept pointing out my brother who had passed away as a result of suicide, and she would be like, and that's Kevin, and she'd kind of ask me who the people in the pictures were, and then she'd be like, what happened to Kevin? And well, he passed away. And then we'd have this conversation over and over again, but then and I was just thinking, oh my gosh, I cannot continue to say this over and over again. And at the end of it, it was almost like after we'd said it so many times, she was able to finish the thought that she needed to get to, which was Kevin was just young and he didn't know, and he's in heaven now, which for my very Italian Catholic grandmother was a very big thing to hear coming from her. And it was like, and then the conversation was over. And I tell people that because while it was very emotionally draining, it was also one of the most rewarding conversations I had that like warmed my heart at the end. And then I kind of, now that I'm farther away from it, I can see how, like, why it was a circle and where she was trying to get to that final part that she couldn't get to, and so we kept circling. And once she was able to complete that thought, she was like, okay, now let's go on to the next page of family photos. But that was a very small moment of helping be a caregiver for her, where someone that's a full-time caregiver or even a 50% of the time caregiver, I'm very interested to see how that works, because I just, an hour for me and I was exhausted, which makes me sound terrible, but
No, no, I mean, it is a very, very, very challenging situation. I'm um I'm not a full-time caregiver, but I am the person who is closest to my dad. So I mentioned that when I learned about him being diagnosed, I was living in Hawaii, and my life came to a screeching halt because I knew that that meant that I would have to come to be closer to help him in this process. So that's what I did a few months after learning about him being not diagnosed. I relocated back to Georgia so that I can be closer and help him. And I think there are different stages of caregiving in general, and with people who are dealing with dementia. There are some more specifics, but in general, I think initially it's a huge shock, and particularly with people who are caring for older adults or their parents. Or, I think we all know that our parents are getting older and we're getting older. But what I've learned from my experience and from talking to other people about my experience is that we somehow do not connect that they're getting older and they're going to need a lot of support. We, on the surface, we know that, but we don't think about what that entails. So I think the first stage is really, coming to the realization that you have to do sort of a needs assessment and figure out exactly what that person needs as far as medical care, as far as their living situation, what type of support do they need? Do they need in-home care? Are they going to stay at home? Are they going to go to a facility? There are just so many levels of assessment that need to take place in the beginning. And that's the part I think that's most overwhelming when a person still is very capable, but there are areas that they may be falling short in and need support, but they're not, they don't want the support because they don't think they need the support. And then you want to allow them to have as much autonomy as possible. I know that's really where I'm trying to focus my work. Sorry, there's an update on my phone. I mean, on my computer. So I'm really trying to focus my work with that group of caregivers, those who are just becoming aware that there's something going on. But what I've learned from doing some interviews with people to try to figure out how I can help best is that a lot of people are really in denial about exactly what's going on, and they don't fully understand the gravity of the situation, or they're not ready to acknowledge it. And I saw that in my own family where people would minimize the things that were going on with my dad. Um, he had a routine. He was living by himself because my mom passed away back in 2002. So he was living by himself and he had a routine. He had been doing the same thing for 20 years since he retired. So he looked like he was higher functioning than he really was. But it was just that muscle memory. Like he knew I do this at this time and this at that time. And this. And then when he had the neuropsychological evaluation, it really helped me to clearly understand where his level of functioning was, and what type of support he needed. And so then that moves into like the next stage of deciding who's going to be a part of that support group, because sometimes there are family members or people that you may anticipate are going to be available in a certain way, but they're not. Or the person that needs the support may reject the support from certain people. I'm the youngest of 9, so even when my siblings have tried to assist, when my dad had a little bit more awareness of what was going on, he always wanted me there. And I, wanted to be there when I could. But the reality is that one person cannot do all of the things that are necessary to be a caregiver and still be able to take care of themselves. So, building that team and finding people that are also going to be well received by the person who needs the care is important.
I think that makes sense. I am the oldest of 8, and so I have grown children, but my siblings are still having kids, and they still live near, my parents and things like that. And so I can see how it might be easier for my parents if, whenever this point came up to take, the help from my little sister, because for the last, few years, they've been helping so much on a day-to-day basis with her and her kids. So it does make sense because it's a very natural, thing where there's so much distance between where my life with them was and my life now is, but their lives are very closely connected still. So I can definitely see how there would be some people where I may be the most organized and, all of these things. So you would think that I'm the one to hop in and help, but the comfort level might not be there if this was to come up. So I can see that with the youngest child versus the oldest child.
Right, right. Yeah. And then there are people, in families that have children. I don't have any children again. So they have children. And so the belief is that it's going to be more taxing on them versus someone who doesn't have children. Sometimes that's the belief. So there are a lot of different dynamics that play out when it comes to caregiving and the support that the person who needs the care gets and the support that the caregiver gets. So my struggle so far has been getting people to realize that they that it's okay for them to take time out for themselves. A lot of people have guilt about doing things for themselves when their loved one is in need and having a high level of need of support. But you can't support someone if you're completely trained. So yes, I'm working on trying to get people to open up a little bit more about it, because some people also feel guilty just acknowledging that it's exhausting, and it is. But it can be exhausting, and it can also be rewarding at times, as you just described. A situation that you had that was rewarding, and it's okay that the two can exist at the same time, basically.
Right. I know that, I've had different situations in my life where I've stepped up and I've handled them and people are like, "Oh, that's so great and it's so amazing that you do that." And then I feel guilty because I'm like, I hate that I volunteered to do, I feel so miserable. And it took like a real brain shift to be like, "Okay, but you're still doing it even though it's not what you wanted to do." Like it's okay to do this, not sometimes all the things that we do in our lives, they're not enjoyable, but we do them because it's the right thing to do and stuff like that. And I felt guilty for not feeling like, oh, yes, this has been such a blessing to me, as I did it the way everyone else kind of acted about it. But it's definitely hard. It's got to be very hard with your parents because they're the ones that are supposed to take care of things throughout life. And then there's that shift, and it's got to be hard for them to kind of go into being the ones that are dependent on the younger generation. So
Right.
so what you do is you help people kind of evaluate, and correct me if I'm wrong, you help people evaluate what the need is for, the person that needs care, and what the need is for the caregiver, and kind of how to make a cohesive plan based on that.
I do, but I try to focus more on the need of the caregiver. I think more people need that outlet to be able to say, "Hey, this sucks sometimes, and this is great sometimes." That I'm happy that I get to spend this time with this person, but they're all of their feelings need to be validated. So I try to focus more of my time and attention on what the caregiver needs to help them to be able to continue to support their loved one. And if it means that you need some time away, or that you need to bring in other people to help, that's okay. Helping to give them permission to do that. Because that's something that I struggled with. I never thought that I would have, allow my dad to be placed in a facility, but it just wasn't realistic to think that I could work and be available to him. And even with other, we started out having sitters come into the home, but even with people coming into the home, it was still challenging. There were times where he would leave if no one was here. He would walk. He ended up at a Kroger across town, and I still don't know how he got there. Thankfully, he got there safely, and someone that we knew worked there. We're in a small town, so they worked there and called my nephew. But it just was not possible between me and my brother, who he and I are. We both have power of attorney. It just wasn't possible to do that, and I feel like he wouldn't be here. My dad turned 90 last year. He wouldn't be here if he were still at home, because it would have been so difficult for us to manage that.
Well, and I think also there's still this stigma surrounding, nursing homes and assisted living homes, as if you're kind of shipping off that next generation, but it's a completely different world than what it was maybe like 40 years ago. And so I think memory care is one of those things that it can be dangerous. It can be very dangerous for people if they're at home. And if they're at home with a stranger, I've told my husband before, I'm like, if I, get dementia or Alzheimer's, you need to put me in a home, because if I wake up one day and don't know who you are, I will hurt you. I know me, and I know my fight or flight instincts will make me fight because there's this strange man in my house. So just knowing like the instinctual part of me has made me like already be like, hey, if I start to have memory issues, you need to not have me at home because it won't be safe for you. But I also think that it's important for people to realize that, there's all kinds of different ways to care for your loved ones. And that doesn't mean that you have to have them stay in your home. That might not be giving them the best care. And also, when they're in an assisted living or memory care facility, they get the structure, and they also get those activities that help stimulate their brains. Like
Right.
I've told my husband, I'm like, I'd love to be sitting there playing bingo on Thursday nights. And that's just me. I'm like channeling my inner like old lady. And I'm like, I would
Yeah.
love to have my meals prepared for me and my medicine handed to me when I need to take it. Like that is living the dream for me. So, but it's because you get those communities of people that are also kind of in that same age. They've lived through the same life events that were, nationally or globally important. They can relate to each other on certain things, and then they've got a structure, and they've got places to or events to do things. There's constantly some kind of activity going on. So I think that, and I'm not saying one option is better than the other, because it really depends on the person and the
Mhm.
circumstances. And I do think it's important, though, to point out that you can be a caregiver in different ways. You can be a caregiver for someone if they live in your home or if they don't. And I think that that's really an important thing to make people realize as far as caregiver support, is that you don't have to feel guilt because your caregiving is different than what people may expect.
Right. Right. And it took some time for us to get there. But because my dad's doctor, we were very fortunate to have a physician who um, had gone through the same thing with his father. And so he spoke very frank, frankly with us, like, you need to do this. This is what's going to help him to be able to function. And we're like, yeah, we're not interested in that right now. He said he needs to have these interactions with people that will help to stimulate his mind, and he'll be physically active, because he was just sitting at home, watching TV every day, not really doing anything. And I really and truly believe that that is what has helped him to 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 continue to be able to be mobile, and to, he can pretty much care for himself, as far as he can, feed himself. He can change his clothes and all of those things. He just cognitively, he there are some delays there, but I didn't expect him to be at the level that he's at now. Um, you know, he was diagnosed in 2014. I never would have expected him to be where he is now at in 2023. It almost seems like once he was placed in that facility, things stabilized, and he really has not declined since he went into assisted living.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's also, that's a long time. That really is. That's a very long time for since his diagnosis to have,
Right.
the schedule, and he probably needed that daily interaction after being married for so long and then losing his wife of so many years. So I can definitely see how that's helpful. So I definitely think that anybody listening to this can feel it from different areas, because there's different stages in your life where you are going to be the caregiver, and then eventually where you'll need someone to help take care of you. Um, so for the people that you're helping with caregiver support, what does that process look like? Do they fill out a form on your website and then kind of meet with you as if you were their therapist to work through things, or is it more of a coaching program where you teach them tools and things like that, as if you were taking parenting classes, but the other end of it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I am only doing coaching with that group. Um, I think I mentioned to you earlier that I did a lot of combat trauma therapy. Maybe this was before we started. I mentioned that. And since then, I've shifted my focus to more wellness, prevention. And so I'm doing coaching with that group, positive psychology coaching. And from there, if there are people that seem to need more support as far as therapy, then I will refer them out to someone else.
Yeah, that's great. I was actually reading an article recently that was kind of targeted at counselors and therapists, it was talking about how drained at the end of the day. And they were like, there's a lot of skills and things that you can help people with in a coaching setting where it's not a full day of, sessions with patients and all of those things. Like, you can still add value. And also it's in a way that people want to learn today. People want to learn in those coaching environments and don't necessarily want to meet with a therapist every week. Obviously I love, I'm always like, my therapist, like, I love her. So I would talk to her every day if I could, just because I like talking to her. But I also do coaching courses and things online because I like learning that way. And I think that it's an interesting, I feel like the word trend makes things sound so tacky. So not really trend, but it's an interesting shift. And I think that it had already kind of started before COVID. But when everyone went remote and virtual, it's really given people the comfort level with doing these things online and doing the coaching. And I think that it's really an interesting way to be able to help more people, in a broader match. And then, like you said, if they need more help, refer them out to someone that can be a counselor to them on a one-on-one setting. And I think that that's a really key part there that I think some of the coaching courses I've looked at online miss, where it's, they're going to kind of take on everything and they can't really be your therapist and do
Right.
coaching. They have to learn where that line is, where it's like, okay, now you need to take it to a therapist because this is a personal, struggle that's going to go beyond the coaching.
Right. And I agree with you that there are lots of ways that people can learn from psychologists without it being in a therapy session one-on-one. I'm also developing an online course to address those issues related to healthy aging and brain health. And I'm creating, I haven't created this, but it's in my mind. Because initially I wanted to create a course for caregivers, right? And when I started to survey people, that's when I realized they weren't ready for that. So I have started to develop some other things for them, things that are maybe a little more palatable, like something that you can do right before a visit, or something that you can do right after a visit, as far as relaxation exercises, stress management, those kinds of things, where they can see the value or see that it can be useful right away. I think I was thinking well beyond where the group that I wanted to target was thinking. So just trying to find other ways to help.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I was also working on a course recently, and I was sitting there thinking, this is too much to create. I'm just going to do it as I go because it's a lot. Um, but I think that it's great to have those resources for people out there. So if someone is listening and they want, to have coaching because they're going through this, or they know someone else is going, how do they reach out to you? Like, is this, is there an online community? How is that, what's the next step?
The next step, well, two things they could do. One, they could the probably the easiest way to reach me is by going to Instagram at Dr.Mel.Green, and my contact information is listed there. Also, if people wanted to get more information about things that they could do to improve brain health, I do have a free PDF that they can download and the website is resilience.ck.page. So
okay, and I'll definitely put the links in there. I know that
okay.
all of them always end up getting everywhere. So I think that this is a really interesting topic. I'm definitely going to have you come back on and talk about the military, trauma psychology, and also at some point nerd out about forensics with you, since
Okay.
I have that degree that I never did anything with. Just thought I was like, hey, this is interesting. Let's get $50,000 in student loan. So, but it's been really great talking about, this, part of what you're doing and your career step. And I always think it's very interesting to kind of see how people's lives have led them to the areas that they focus on. So like if someone just comes to you and they're like, hey, I'm a heart surgeon. Well, why are you a heart surgeon? Well, because when I was 12, I realized heart surgeons would make a lot of money. See, that there's not a progression, but when I can see the life experience and the passion that has drawn someone to what they're doing, it feels so much more valuable to me because it's coming from this very sincere place of wanting to help. And I think that you putting effort into this while also being a caregiver, it just seems like so much. But it's really great that you're taking, that experience and really helping a whole community of people, with the same situation. So it's been really great having you on. As I know I get chatty. So was there anything we wanted to talk about that I missed?
No, I think that was it. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. It was great. Thank you for joining the Allison in Wonderland podcast.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review.
Also, remember, this show does not contain medical advice that you should follow without speaking to your doctor. If you or someone you know is in crisis, call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. You can call or text the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988.